The taxi slowed at the corner, its tires crunching against the gravel that lined the driveway I had known for more than 40 years. My house stood at the end, framed by the elm tree Frank and I planted the year Carl turned 6. Its branches stretched higher now, gnarled and protective, a sentinel of everything I had built. I stepped out of the cab, suitcase in hand, the faint smell of exhaust clinging to the warm air. My bones ached from the week away. A short trip to visit an old friend in Maine, nothing extravagant, just enough to remind myself I still had pieces of a life outside these walls. I had imagined coming home to familiar quiet, a porch light burning, the scent of lavender from the garden. But what I saw stopped me. A new lock gleamed on the front door, its brass too bright, too modern. The doormat with my name embroidered across it, Hemsworth, was gone. In its place, a plain rug lay, edges still sharp from the store. For a moment I thought I had stumbled onto the wrong house. But no. The paint I had chosen, the shutters Frank had hung crookedly and never fixed. This was mine. Only altered, as though someone had stripped pieces of me out while I was away. I rolled my suitcase to the porch, tried the knob. It resisted. I pressed harder. Nothing. My chest tightened. Then a voice came from behind me. "Mom?" Carl stood on the walkway, his wife Jody beside him. Their clothes were casual, too casual, as though they had prepared for this moment, rehearsed it. "What's going on?" I asked. My voice was steadier than I felt. Jody answered first, her tone clipped, professional, the way she spoke to waiters or nurses. "We changed the locks while you were gone." "It's time, Mabel. You don't live here anymore." The suitcase handle dug into my palm. "Excuse me?" Carl wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's for the best. We've been talking about it. The house is too much for you. Too many stairs. Too lonely. We thought—" "You thought?" My voice cracked sharp. "You thought you could just erase me from my own home?" Jody's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We're not erasing. We're protecting. You'll understand in time." I reached into my coat pocket and closed my hand around something cold and familiar. The spare key I'd hidden years ago, taped under the loose board of the porch rail, just in case. Without another word, I bent, pried the board loose, and pulled it free. Their faces shifted. Carl pale, Jody stiff as stone. The key slid into the lock, turned smooth, clicked open. I pushed the door wide and stepped inside. The air smelled different, fresh paint, lemon cleaner, as though someone had tried to scrub me out. But I was still here, and no one was going to tell me otherwise. The moment I crossed the threshold, the house felt wrong. Not just cleaner, not just tidier, wrong. The hallway table, the one Frank had built from oak scraps, was gone. In its place stood a sleek metal stand with a mirror perched above it. A stranger's reflection stared back at me. My hair uncombed from travel, suitcase leaning against my leg, eyes wide with disbelief. I wheeled my bag farther inside. The living room opened before me, but it wasn't mine anymore. The floral rug I'd bought after Ruby was born, because it reminded me of spring, had been rolled up, replaced with a cold gray carpet. My armchair, the one with worn arms from years of reading, was missing. A sectional sofa stretched across the space, soulless and new. On the mantel, where Frank's picture once stood, there was now a ceramic vase with fake eucalyptus leaves. My husband's smile, our life together, had been boxed away somewhere, shoved out of sight. I pressed a hand to my chest. The air was too thin here. Behind me, Carl stepped cautiously inside. "Mom, listen." I turned sharply. "Where are my things?" He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes on the floor. "We put them in the garage. Some in boxes, some in storage. We thought it would make the house more functional." "Functional for who?" My voice rose. "For you? For Jody? For your idea of what belongs?" Jody followed him in, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "It's not personal, Mabel. You've been struggling to keep up with the house. We thought a fresh start would help. Fresh for whom? I demanded. She smiled thinly. For all of us. I walked deeper into the room, searching. My quilt, the one I had stitched after Frank's surgery, was folded carelessly on the back of a chair. The family photo albums, 20 years of birthdays and holidays, were stacked in a plastic bin by the wall, labeled in Jody's handwriting. Basement. Misc. I knelt, pulled one open. Pages stuck together. A photo of Carl at 12, holding a science fair ribbon, slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up with trembling hands. This is my life, I said quietly. Not miscellaneous. Carl's voice was soft, almost apologetic. We're just trying to help, Mom. Help? My laugh was sharp. Help would be asking. Not deciding, not changing locks, not throwing me out like old furniture. The silence thickened. I stood, spine straight. This is my house. My name is on the deed. My money paid for these walls. You may want me invisible, but I am still here. For the first time, Jody's expression faltered. Just for a moment. I slipped the photo into my pocket. A reminder, a weapon, if needed. They could repaint, rearrange, replace. But they could not erase me. I carried my suitcase straight to the kitchen, ignoring the way Carl's voice trailed behind me. The floor gleamed. Too much bleach, too much effort spent on cleansing me away. The curtains were new, thin white panels without the sunflowers I'd sewn on years ago. But the cabinets were still mine, the knobs worn smooth by my hands. I set the kettle on the stove and filled it with water. The act was deliberate, almost ceremonial. The sound of water rushing from the faucet broke the silence like a challenge. Jody appeared in the doorway. Mabel, this isn't... This is my kitchen, I interrupted, and I'll make tea in it. Her lips pressed into a line. I opened the cupboard, half expecting to find my mugs gone. But there they were, shoved to the back behind a stack of Jody's pristine white dishes. I pulled out the chipped blue one Frank had bought me at a roadside fair, set it on the counter, and reached for the tin of tea. They hadn't touched it. They wouldn't dare. Carl hovered in the doorway, torn between the two of us. Mom, you can't just pretend nothing's changed. Nothing's changed for me, I said, pouring water into the cup. I live here. I eat here. I sleep here. Jody's tone hardened. We've made arrangements. There's a senior community just across town. Lovely place, actually. Meals provided, social activities. You'll have everything you need. I stirred my tea slowly, the spoon clinking against the porcelain. What I need is my home. She exhaled sharply, as though I were a child refusing bedtime. You're being unreasonable. No, I said, lifting the cup to my lips. I'm being here. The kitchen filled with the smell of steeping leaves. For a moment, it felt almost normal. I carried my tea into the living room and sank into the sectional sofa that wasn't mine. The cushions were stiff, unwelcoming, but I planted myself in the center, teacup steady in hand. Carl shifted uneasily. Mom? I'm not leaving, I said. The words hung heavy. I sipped my tea and placed the cup carefully on the new glass coffee table, the one that didn't have the scratch marks from Ruby's toy cars. My eyes met Jody's. You may have changed the locks. You may have boxed my things. But I'm still here. And I intend to be seen. Her jaw tightened. We'll see about that. Carl looked between us, his face pale. He had always hated confrontation. But this wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about survival. Mine. I leaned back against the sofa, shoulders straight. Yes, we will. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was a battlefield, and I had just planted my flag. That night I didn't unpack the suitcase. I left it in the hallway like a silent statement. I wasn't a guest here. I wasn't moving in. I was home. Sleep didn't come easy. I sat in the stiff sectional until the house grew quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound left. Jody and Carl retreated upstairs, into my bedroom, no doubt, while I stayed below like some unwelcome shadow. Around midnight, I rose. My body ached, but my mind was sharp, restless. I moved through the house slowly, touching surfaces, reclaiming them with my fingertips. When I reached the dining room, I pulled open the sideboard. To my relief, not everything had been boxed away. The bottom drawer still held the leather folder where I kept important papers. Wills, bank receipts, the deed. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them. And there it was, the original purchase agreement, dated decades ago, signed by Frank and me. My name in bold black ink. No addendum, no transfer. Still mine. I pressed the document flat on the table and let the sight of it steady me. The sound of footsteps startled me. Carl stood in the doorway, hair rumpled, robe tied loosely. His eyes darted to the paper. "Mom," he whispered, "what are you doing?" "Reminding myself," I said, sliding the deed toward him. "Whose house this is?" He glanced at it but didn't touch. Jody says a lot of things," I cut in. "But this paper says more." He rubbed his forehead. "You don't understand. We're just trying to help me?" My voice sharpened. "By locking me out? By throwing away my life into cardboard boxes labeled miscellaneous? This isn't help, Carl. This is theft." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked suddenly younger, smaller, the boy who once begged me to protect him from nightmares. I thought it would be easier," he muttered. "For you, maybe," I said quietly. "Never for me." He didn't argue. He just turned and walked back upstairs, shoulders hunched. When the house settled again, I returned the papers to the folder but slipped the deed into my suitcase. Proof I couldn't risk leaving in plain sight. By dawn, I was back in the kitchen, boiling water for tea. When Jody appeared, perfectly dressed for work, her eyes flicked to my cup, then to the suitcase in the hall. "You'll wear yourself out resisting," she said smoothly, like it was a medical diagnosis. I lifted the cup, savoring the steam. "I'm stronger than you think." Her smile was cold. "We'll see." Yes, I thought, we would. Because the battle had stopped being about comfort the moment I held that deed in my hands. Now it was about truth. And I had proof that truth lived here. Still mine, still solid, still signed in ink they couldn't erase. By the third day, Jody stopped pretending. She no longer bothered with polite smiles or softened tones. Her eyes tracked me like I was an intruder in my own home. That morning, I woke to the sound of her voice downstairs. Firm, clipped, professional, the way she sounded at the hospital. I stayed at the top of the stairs listening. Yes, she's refusing to leave. She's confused, paranoid. I'm worried about her safety. A pause. Yes, a welfare check would be appropriate. Her words froze my blood. She was calling social services, laying the groundwork to have me declared unfit. I came down slowly, each step deliberate. She ended the call just as I entered the kitchen. "Who was that?" I asked. She turned, smile brittle. "Just work." But her hands betrayed her, fingers tightening around her phone. "Work doesn't schedule welfare checks," I said. Carl appeared behind her, drawn by my voice. "Mom, maybe this isn't—" "Quiet," I snapped. "I want to hear it from her." Jody's eyes glittered. "I'm concerned for you, Mabel. You wander at night. You dig through old papers. You seem disoriented. Professionals should evaluate you before something happens." The fury that rose in me was hot, clean. "You mean before I stop you?" Her lips curled, but she didn't answer. 2 hours later, a knock rattled the front door. A man and a woman stood there, social workers, badges visible, clipboards in hand. "Mrs. Hemsworth?" the man asked. "We've been asked to check on your well-being." Jody hovered behind them, arms folded, the picture of concern. I stepped aside, letting them in. "Of course. Come in. I have nothing to hide." They sat with me in the dining room, asking quiet questions. Did I know where I was? Did I manage my finances? Could I cook, shop, bathe without help? I answered clearly, calmly, every detail precise. I even pulled out the deed from my suitcase, placing it on the table like a sword. This is my home. My money bought it. My name is on it. I manage everything myself. The woman's eyes flicked to Jody, then back to me. She nodded slowly. When the visit ended, they thanked me for my time. Jody's smile had cracked by then, tight with strain. As the door closed behind them, I turned to her. You thought you could paint me weak, I said quietly. But weakness isn't in me. It's in lies. Her face hardened, and she stormed upstairs without a word. Carl lingered, looking torn. Mom, she thinks she's helping. No, I said, my voice steady as stone. She thinks she's winning. And I wasn't about to let her. The morning after the welfare check, I knew one thing with certainty. I couldn't fight this battle alone. Jody had too much confidence, too much certainty in the way she pulled strings. If I wanted to survive, not just exist, but truly survive, I needed allies. I started with Kay, my neighbor of 20 years. She'd seen me carry groceries, shovel snow, fix my gutters long after Carl stopped offering. She knew the rhythm of my life better than Jody ever cared to. I walked across the street with my scarf pulled tight, the deed tucked in my bag like a secret weapon. Kay answered before my second knock. Mabel, she said, eyes narrowing. You look like you've been through hell. Close enough, I said. Over tea at her kitchen table, I laid it out. The locks, the boxes, the welfare check. Her hands curled into fists on the tablecloth. They can't just shove you out, she snapped. That house is yours. Everyone knows it. That's why I need you, I said. If this goes further, if they try again, I need someone outside these walls who can tell the truth. Her answer was immediate. You've got me. The first ally. Next, I called Nora, my old choir friend. Her daughter was a paralegal. She knew someone sharp, someone who dealt with property disputes. By evening, Nora had scribbled a name and number on a note card and pressed it into my hand like contraband. Don't wait, she urged. You need someone who speaks the language of courts and contracts. Jody won't play fair. She was right. That night, I sat at the dining room table, my table, though Jody had replaced the chairs with stiff modern ones, and dialed the number. A woman answered, brisk but warm. Elaine Porter, estate law. I introduced myself, explained enough for her to understand the urgency. She didn't gasp or pity me. She asked questions, dates, signatures. Who paid for what? When I told her I had the deed in my possession, her voice sharpened. Keep it safe. Make copies. Bring everything to me. They can't erase paper. It was the first time in weeks I felt the ground solid beneath me. When I hung up, I found Carl standing in the doorway. He'd overheard enough. His face was pale, conflicted. Mom, he said, voice low, you don't have to drag outsiders into this. Outsiders? I held up the deed. This isn't about outsiders. This is about truth, and truth doesn't need permission to walk in the front door. He looked at me a long time, then walked away without another word. I slipped the deed back into my bag, feeling its weight like a shield. Jody had her strategies. Now, I had mine. And for the first time since the locks had changed, I didn't feel outnumbered. Elaine's office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, wedged between a barber shop and a bakery. Nothing flashy, no glass towers or polished lobbies, just a brass plaque on the door and the faint smell of coffee drifting from the hallway. It felt honest. I climbed the stairs slowly, clutching my bag. The deed, the receipts, the folder of property taxes. I'd gathered everything. Proof of a life built one payment, one signature at a time. Elaine met me at the door herself. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, hair pulled back into a knot that didn't budge when she moved. She shook my hand firmly, then guided me into a small office lined with shelves of thick legal books. "Start at the beginning," she said. So I did. From the new locks to the boxes in the garage. From the welfare check to Jody's whispering threats. I spread the documents across her desk like cards in a game I refused to lose. She examined each page carefully, lips pursed, occasionally tapping a pen against the desk. When she reached the deed, she nodded once. "This is clear. Titles in your name alone. No joint ownership, no transfers. That house is yours." Relief loosened something in my chest, but it wasn't complete. She won't stop with locks and boxes. She'll find another way, Elaine leaned back in her chair. Then we prepare. First, I'll file notice that no property transfers or liens can be processed without your direct consent. Second, we'll draft a cease and desist regarding harassment. If she tries to evict you, we'll be ready with injunctions. Her tone was calm, steady, the language of survival spoken fluently. "And Carl?" I asked, my voice softer. "He stands beside her, even if he doesn't see it." Elaine's gaze softened. "Family complicates everything, but the law doesn't care about complication. It cares about paper, dates, signatures. You hold those?" I nodded. Before I left, she handed me a slim folder. Inside, a checklist, banking accounts, power of attorney, will revisions. "They may try to argue incompetence," she warned. "You need everything in order, airtight, no cracks to exploit." I slipped the folder into my bag, feeling the weight of it settle beside the deed. On the bus ride home, I watched the town slide past the window. Shops, kids on bikes, the same park bench where Frank once tied Ruby's shoelaces. My life was stitched into this place, thread by stubborn thread. When I stepped off at my corner, the house loomed ahead. Jody's car was in the driveway. Through the front window, I saw her pacing, phone pressed to her ear, her gestures sharp and impatient. For the first time, I didn't feel dread watching her silhouette move through my rooms. I felt ready. The locks may have changed, the furniture may have shifted, but the ground beneath this house was mine, and I had just found someone willing to fight beside me to prove it. By the next morning, the temperature in the house had shifted, not in the air, but in the way Jody moved. Her footsteps were sharper, her tone clipped, her eyes calculating. She knew something had changed. At breakfast, I set my mug of tea on the table. She placed a plate of toast in front of Carl, then turned to me. "I had a call from the clinic today. They're asking questions about you." Her words were bait. I didn't bite. "I imagined they'd be interested," I said calmly. Her smile was thin. "Strange, isn't it? How quickly rumors spread when certain people stir trouble. Makes me wonder if you've been speaking to outsiders." Carl looked up, uneasy. "Jody?" But she silenced him with a glance. "Because if you are Mabel, that could look unstable, distrustful. People might start to wonder if you're capable of handling things yourself." I held her gaze. "Let them wonder. Paper speaks louder than whispers." For the first time, her expression cracked. Just for a flicker, but it was enough. The day grew heavier after that. She followed me through rooms, watching, her presence clinging like smoke. When I opened the hall closet to retrieve my coat, I noticed boxes stacked higher than before. More of my belongings, china sets, photo frames, quilts, sealed in cardboard, marked with Jody's neat handwriting. Donation, storage, useless, useless. I closed the door slowly, forcing my hand not to tremble. In the afternoon, Kay knocked. She carried a basket of muffins, her excuse for checking in. Jody opened the door before I could. "Kay," she said sweetly, "Mabel's resting." She gets tired these days, but Kay's eyes met mine over Jody's shoulder. She saw me standing there, alert and upright. She pushed past gently, setting the basket on the counter. "Funny, she doesn't look tired." Jody's smile stiffened. "We don't need interruptions." "Good thing I'm not one," Kay said, voice firm. It was a small victory, But the look Jody shot me afterward could have cut glass. That evening, I found my phone missing from the nightstand. When I confronted Carl, he shifted uncomfortably. Jody thought it might be better if... Better for who? I asked sharply. He couldn't answer. I lay awake long after they'd gone to bed, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked and settled, but underneath was a new rhythm. The hum of war. Jody was tightening her grip, boxing me in, stripping away the tools I might use to fight. But she didn't know what I carried in my bag. The deed, Elaine's checklist, the names of those who believed me. She thought she was isolating me. But every step she took only sharpened my resolve, and I wasn't the one who should be afraid. 2 days later, I carried my bag down the courthouse steps with a signed stack of documents inside. Elaine had moved quickly, quicker than I expected. The cease and desist was filed, notices placed. My signature, my name, my authority. For the first time in weeks, I felt stitched back into the fabric of my own life. I clutched the folder to my chest on the bus ride home, ignoring the sway of strangers around me. The paper wasn't just paper, it was armor. When I stepped off at my stop, the sight of Jody's car in the driveway made my stomach tighten, but I didn't flinch. I walked straight inside, past her shoes in the hall, past her perfume clouding the air. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself wine in the middle of the afternoon. Carl sat slouched at the table, fiddling with his phone, avoiding both our eyes. "You've been out," Jody said, voice like a knife wrapped in silk. "Yes." I set my bag deliberately on the counter. "Downtown." Her gaze flicked to the bag. "Errands?" "Protections," I said evenly. Carl looked up. "Mom." But I didn't let him soften the blow. I pulled out the folder, laid it flat on the table. "These are legal filings. This house is mine. Any attempt to remove me is harassment, and it will be met in court. Officially." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Jody laughed, sharp and humorless. "You're dragging courts into family matters? That's pathetic?" "What's pathetic," I said, "is thinking silence equals surrender." Her jaw tightened. Carl shifted uncomfortably, caught between us like a child at recess. "You've really lost it," Jody muttered. She grabbed her glass and stalked down the hallway, heels clicking like a metronome of fury. Carl lingered. "Mom, do you have to escalate this?" "Carl," I said softly, "she changed the locks on your childhood home. She boxed up my life and labeled it useless. That's not family. That's erasure." He had no reply, only a flicker of shame before he looked away. That night, the house was quiet, but not restful. I heard Jody on the phone behind the closed bedroom door, her voice low, quick, laced with venom. She was plotting. I couldn't catch the words, but the tone was enough. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea cooling beside me. My hands didn't shake as I wrote a list in my journal. Change passwords. Bank accounts review. Copy all receipts. Move valuables to K's for safekeeping. She wanted war in shadows. I would fight in daylight, with paper and proof. By the time I closed the journal, one thing was clear. Jody thought she was tightening the noose, but all she'd done was give me reason to pull it off and place it gently around her own neck. The bank smelled like paper and coffee, neither of which belonged to Jody. I had never liked the polished teller counters or the polite hum of financial machinery, but today, I welcomed it like church. It was sanctuary of a different kind. Paper could be trusted in ways people sometimes could not. Elaine had given me instructions the way a captain gives orders before a sail. 1. Go in person. 2. Bring ID. 3. Do not let anyone accompany you. They can't argue with signatures, she had said, and they hate surprises more than anything. I carried her words like armor. At the counter, I asked for a private meeting with the manager. The woman who appeared introduced herself as Trina, short, brisk, competent. I explained plainly my accounts, my concerns, My daughter-in-law's sudden interest in access. I slid the deed and a copy of the cease and desist across the desk. She read, lips thinning. "We can freeze any joint access immediately," Trina said without hesitation. "Remove authorized users. Set transaction alerts to your phone and email, and we'll flag any request for beneficiary changes for verification." Her pen moved, efficient and certain. "Would you like us to issue new cards as well?" "Yes," I said. "All of it. And change the online passwords. I don't want surprises." My voice steadied with each instruction. Action steadied me. She glanced up, softer now. "You're doing the right thing." People are surprised at how often family disputes end up at the teller window. She did not ask me why. She simply did it. While she worked, I told Trina about the spare key taped under the porch, the boxes labeled miscellaneous, the night Jody called social services. I expected sympathy, perhaps confusion. Instead, Trina's jaw tightened the way a professional's did when a problem smelled like paperwork and liability. "We'll log everything," she promised. "Bring any documentation and we'll attach it to your file." When I left the bank, the sun felt brassy and insistent. I drove to Kay's and handed her a tote of things: my grandmother's brooch, the tin of letters Frank had written before his surgery, the box of spare keys. "Just keep them until this is sorted," I told her. Kay wrapped the brooch in tissue like it was a holy thing. Back home, I went through the house with a checklist Elaine had sent: account numbers, insurance policies, contact numbers for financial institutions, the trustee for my small savings. I made copies, stacks of copies, stapled and labeled, paper again, proof. That evening, when Jody came into the kitchen, sharp and scented, she found me at the table with a laminated folder and a pen. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Securing my affairs," I replied. "You tried to lock me out of my home." "I'm locking out anyone who should never have had the keys." She laughed, brittle. "You think paperwork will save you?" "No," I said. "But signatures will stop people who think they can rewrite my life overnight." I slid a copy of the bank forms across the table. Trina's on my side now. So is Elaine. Her face shifted, the color draining as if someone had dimmed the lights. For the first time, I saw the real line beneath her confidence, calculation overlaid with panic. She found her smile again, a gesture stretched thin. "There are more ways to make someone leave," she said softly, a threat dressed in civility. I closed the folder and stood. "Then try them," I said, "but do it with witnesses." She hesitated, and in that pause, a new balance tipped in my favor. The locks had changed, but so had the rules. The next week, Jody changed her tactics. She stopped confronting me directly, stopped lacing her sentences with venom when Carl was around. Instead, she turned subtle, the way mold creeps into corners unseen. Small things began to vanish. My reading glasses, gone from the nightstand. The notebook where I kept my lists, missing from the kitchen drawer. A framed photo of Frank and me, replaced on the hallway shelf with a scented candle I'd never buy. At first, I thought I'd misplaced them, but the pattern sharpened too quickly, too neatly. Not loss, erasure. Carl noticed nothing, or pretended not to. He left early for work, came home late, eyes locked on his phone or Jody's expression. Sometimes I wondered if he was a prisoner too, or if comfort was his chosen cell. On Thursday, I caught Jody in the act. She was in the garage, a stack of my baking pans in her arms. She froze when she saw me. "Those are mine," I said, my voice flat. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "They're old, Mabel." Rusted. I thought I'd drop them at Goodwill. Clear some space. Space for what? Her smile thinned. For the future. I took the pans from her hands, set them firmly back on the shelf. For a moment, our eyes locked, neither blinking. It wasn't about cookware. It was about territory, about who decided what stayed and what vanished. That night, I called Elaine. "She's escalating," I said. "Not openly, but with these small removals. She's trying to prove incompetence. Elaine sighed, the sound of someone who had seen this strategy before. Document everything. Dates, times, items. If she's building a case, we'll dismantle it with proof. So I began a new ledger. Every missing object, every suspicious substitution. June 14th, reading glasses gone. June 16th, notebook missing. June 17th, pans attempted removal. Each entry a stone in the wall I was building. But Jody wasn't satisfied with theft. On Sunday, she staged a performance. While Carl set the table for dinner, she carried in a tray of tea. She placed a cup in front of me, steam curling upward. "Careful, Mabel," she said brightly. "Don't burn yourself. You've been forgetful lately." The words were casual enough, but Carl's head snapped up, watching me closely. I understood then. She wasn't just targeting my possessions. She was targeting my mind. I didn't rise to the bait. I lifted the cup steadily, blew across the surface, and took a measured sip. "My memory's fine," I said, clear and strong. "I remember too much, in fact." "Like the day you changed the locks while I was gone?" Carl flinched. Jody's smile cracked. "That evening, when I was alone in my room, I placed my ledger beside the folder Elaine had given me. 2 weapons, both sharpened. Jody thought she was scripting my decline, but every move she made was being recorded, page by page, and soon her performance would collapse under the weight of its own lies. I knew a ledger alone wouldn't be enough. Paper carried weight, but paper needed voices beside it, witnesses who could speak when Jody tried to twist the story. So I started quietly. Kay, of course, was my first. She'd already seen the boxes, already heard the sweet poison Jody poured at the door. One evening over tea, I asked her, "Would you be willing to tell the truth if it came to that?" She didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting for you to ask." Nora was next. She came by with her crossword books, her laughter sharp as ever. I explained what Jody had done, the locks, the missing things, the staged remarks about my memory. Nora's eyes narrowed. "I still remember the day Carl's father carried you over that threshold. That house is yours. If she thinks she can rewrite history, she's in for a shock." She promised her daughter, the paralegal, would help me keep every timeline exact. Piece by piece, I gathered a circle, not big but steady. At Elaine's suggestion, I bought a small recorder. Nothing dramatic, just a black plastic device that fit into my palm. "Use it sparingly," she warned. "But if she tries to manufacture evidence against you, this will anchor the truth." The first time I clicked it on, Jody was in the kitchen, muttering into her phone. "She's slipping," I heard her say. "I'll push harder. Carl's starting to see it." My pulse quickened, but I didn't stop the recording. Proof. Later that week, she tried again at dinner. She accidentally called me by my sister's name, then laughed lightly when I corrected her. "Oh, Mabel, don't be so sensitive. Everyone forgets sometimes." The recorder in my pocket caught it all. Her tone, Carl's silence, my clear correction. The game had shifted. I also began leaving small traces for others to notice. When Kay visited, I let her see the empty spaces where pictures once hung. When Nora dropped by, I pointed out the stack of boxes labeled useless. They both promised to remember, to tell if the time came. Carl was harder. He lived in a fog between loyalty and denial, pulled like a rope in Jody's hands. One night, when Jody was out late, I tried. "Do you remember who paid the down payment?" I asked him. He shifted, uneasy. "Mom, that was years ago. Why dig it up now?" "Because she's trying to bury me under it," I said quietly. He didn't answer, but he didn't defend her either. And silence, sometimes, is the first crack in a wall. By the end of that week, my folder was heavier, my ledger fuller, and my recorder already held 3 clips strong enough to strip Jody's sweetness from her tongue. She thought she was writing the narrative of my decline. But I had begun writing hers, line by line, with witnesses ready to read it aloud. The more evidence I gathered, the more reckless Jody became. She mistook my calm for weakness, my silence for surrender. But I wasn't quiet anymore. I was listening. On a gray Tuesday, Kay came over with her soup pot in hand. I invited her to stay for dinner. Nora joined later, bringing her crossword puzzles. It wasn't unusual. We'd often had small gatherings. But this time, I had a purpose. Jody walked in, heels clicking, lips painted, a smile too sharp to be kind. She froze when she saw them at my table. "Oh," she said lightly. "I didn't realize we were hosting company." "We're not hosting," I corrected. "I am." Her eyes flickered, but she smoothed her face. "Lovely." The more the merrier dinner was polite at first. Too polite. Jody played the gracious hostess, pouring tea, complimenting Kay's soup, laughing a beat too loudly at Nora's crossword joke. But I knew her. I knew she couldn't resist control for long. The moment came when I asked Kay to pass me my glasses. Jody leaned in quickly, her tone bright for the room. "Mabel, didn't you lose those last week?" "You've been forgetting things a lot lately." Silence fell. Kay froze mid-motion. Nora's pen stopped scratching. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out the small recorder, and placed it in the center of the table. The red light blinked steadily. "Funny you should say that, Jody," I said evenly. "Because this little device remembers everything, even when others pretend to forget." Her smile faltered. For the first time, real color drained from her face. Kay leaned forward. "She's been saying things like that often," she said firmly, "implying you're confused. And boxing up your belongings," Nora added, voice clipped. "I saw the stacks myself." "Useless," she called them. Jody's composure cracked. "You can't be serious." "You're taking her side?" "She's confused. She doesn't understand what she's doing." I cut her off, my voice sharp as glass. "I understand perfectly. You changed the locks. You called social services. You've been trying to erase me, piece by piece." Kay's eyes were fierce. "And now we've seen it for ourselves." Nora nodded. "Heard it too." Carl walked in halfway through, holding his jacket, his face tired from work. He froze at the sight of us around the table, at Jody's expression, cornered, raw. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your wife," I said steadily, "is trying to convince everyone I'm losing my mind." But she forgot something. I don't live in shadows. I live in the open. And now, so does she. The recorder blinked. My friends sat like witnesses in a courtroom. And for the first time, Carl's eyes didn't dodge mine. Jody had wanted an audience for my downfall. Instead, she had found one for her own. The fallout from that dinner was immediate, though not in the way Jody expected. She still wore her smile, still clicked her heels through the house as though nothing had happened. But Kay and Nora had long tongues when truth was involved, and soon the story began to spread. Not as gossip, but as warning. It reached the clinic within a week. I knew because Jody came home one evening, her face tight, her voice sharper than usual. She dropped her purse on the counter and snapped at Carl before he could even ask about her day. "They're whispering," she hissed. "At work. They think I'm—" She stopped herself, but the word hovered in the air. "Dangerous." Carl tried to soothe her, muttering something about stress. But Jody's eyes burned when they landed on me. "You think you've won something, don't you?" Just because your little choir friends like to play judge and jury, I didn't answer. Silence, I'd learned, was a weapon she couldn't blunt, but inside, I was steady. I had expected this moment, the slow unraveling of her carefully tailored mask. A clinic runs on trust. Patients, nurses, doctors, everyone depends on the assumption that care is genuine, and rumors of manipulation, of cruelty toward family, spread fast in such a place. The next day, Kay told me she'd overheard two women at the market. "Isn't she the one?" they'd whispered near the produce aisle. "The doctor with the mother-in-law. Locking her out, calling her confused?" They hadn't said Jody's name, but they didn't need to. Everyone knew. Meanwhile, Jody doubled down. She began arriving home later, papers stuffed in her bag, phone glued to her ear. I caught fragments. "They can't prove?" "And my record is clean." Panic was seeping into her tone, no matter how carefully she tried to varnish it. Carl noticed, though he still clung to denial. "Maybe people just misunderstand," he told me one night, his eyes pleading. "Or maybe," I said gently, "they finally see her for who she is." That landed between us like a stone. He didn't argue, he simply walked away, shoulders heavy. I continued my work quietly. I updated the ledger, copied the recordings, filed more notes with Elaine. Each day that passed, Jody's shadow grew shorter. The breaking point came when a nurse from her clinic stopped by our house. She knocked on the door, asked for Jody, then spotted me in the hallway. Her expression flickered. Pity, recognition, discomfort. She handed over a sealed envelope, saying only, "She'll know what it is." When Jody opened it, her hands trembled. Inside was a formal notice. She was being placed under review. Her face drained of color. She tore the paper in 2, then 4, then 8, as if shredding it could erase the truth. But her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't untouchable anymore. And she knew it. Jody spent the next week in a storm of denial. She stormed through the house, slamming drawers, pacing hallways, phone pressed tight against her ear. I caught snippets of conversations. "It's political. Someone's lying. I've given years to this clinic." But her voice had lost its edge of authority. It carried panic now, and panic is hard to disguise. Carl, caught between us, looked older each day. He tried to defend her, but his words fell apart like wet paper. "They wouldn't review her if there wasn't something real," I told him one night. He didn't answer, just rubbed his temples and muttered, "I can't deal with this." Elaine, meanwhile, urged me forward. "This is your chance," she said. "If you want her gone, not just cornered but finished, you need to show the clinic what she's capable of. Bring me the recordings, the ledger, the witnesses." It was terrifying, the thought of laying my private pain bare before strangers. But I'd already lost too much by keeping quiet. So I gathered everything. The tape where she implied I was forgetful, the one where she muttered into her phone about pushing harder, the photos of boxes labeled useless, the ledger documenting every stolen or discarded possession. I even had Kay and Nora sign statements describing what they'd seen and heard. When Elaine placed it all into a neat binder, I felt a strange calm. The weight of it wasn't grief anymore. It was power. 2 days later, Jody came home with a forced smile. "Preliminary review cleared me," she announced loudly, as though rehearsing for an audience. "Nothing to worry about." But her eyes darted, restless. And when she saw the binder on the table, her face changed. "What's that?" she asked. "Insurance," I said simply. She laughed, too quickly. "You're wasting your time. They'll never listen to you." "They already are," I said softly. That night I slipped the binder into my bag and left early in the morning for Elaine's office. She submitted everything directly to the clinic's board. No whispers now, no rumors. Documentation, signatures, recordings. By Friday, the cracks widened. Jody's phone buzzed endlessly. She left meetings red-eyed and trembling. At dinner, she barely touched her food. Carl asked what was wrong, and she snapped at him so viciously that even he fell silent. I watched from across the table, calm, almost detached. This was no longer just survival. It was justice. On Saturday morning, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't torn. Jody opened it at the counter, her hands shaking. Her face blanched. "Suspended," she whispered. "Pending investigation." Carl stood frozen, the word hanging between them like smoke. Jody crumpled the letter in her hand, but the truth was written everywhere. In her eyes, her posture, the silence that filled the kitchen. Her career wasn't just under review now, it was collapsing. The phone rang just after noon on Monday. Jody snatched it up before the second ring, retreating to the bedroom. The walls were thin. I didn't have to strain to hear. "Yes, this is Dr. Hemsworth," she said, her voice already trembling. Then a pause, and softer. "Yes, I understand. Of course. I'll be there." When she reappeared, her face was pale, her lipstick smudged at the corner. She didn't speak to me, just grabbed her coat and keys and slammed the door. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea cooling in front of me. The silence in her absence was not emptiness, it was relief. Later, Kay called. "Word's out," she said. "The clinic's launched a full investigation." Formal, not just whispers anymore. People are talking, Mabel. And not kindly about her. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. For months I had lived under her shadow, but now the shadow was shrinking. That evening, Carl stumbled into the house late. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. He found me in the living room and stood there awkwardly, like a boy who'd broken something he couldn't repair. "Mom," he said, his voice heavy. "They're saying awful things about Jody at the clinic. You gave them that binder, didn't you?" "I gave them the truth," I replied. "What they do with it is their decision." He dragged a hand through his hair. "She could lose everything." "She tried to take everything from me," I reminded him. The silence between us stretched, filled with years of swallowed words. For the first time, he didn't defend her. He just sat down heavily across from me, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. The next morning, I walked past the clinic on my way to the market. The glass doors reflected the street, but through them I saw Jody at the reception desk, her shoulders rigid, a clipboard pressed against her chest. Behind her, 2 administrators waited, faces stern. I didn't linger, but the image stayed with me. She was no longer untouchable, no longer draped in authority. She was a woman caught in the consequences of her own cruelty. At home, I baked a small pie. Apple, my comfort ritual. The scent filled the kitchen, warm and defiant. When Kay stopped by, I gave her half. "You're smiling," she noted. "Haven't seen that in a while." "I think I remember how," I said. That night, as I slid into bed, I realized something. This wasn't just about reclaiming my house or my dignity. It was about reclaiming my voice. Jody had tried to silence me with labels, with manipulation, with cruelty whispered behind closed doors. But now, her own voice was betraying her. In reports, in testimonies, in every frightened phone call she made. And for the first time in months, I slept deeply, without waking at every creak of the house. Because the fight wasn't mine alone anymore. The system she thought she owned had finally turned its gaze on her, and I was no longer afraid. By Wednesday, the whispers had grown into conversations, and the conversations into verdicts spoken in break rooms and corridors. Jody had always been the type to command attention. Her voice carried, her confidence filled any room. But now, her name carried a different weight. Kay's niece, who worked at the clinic, slipped me a quiet update. "They've pulled her patient files," she said over the phone, cross-checking records, reviewing her notes. "Everyone knows it's bad. No one's sitting with her in the cafeteria anymore. Even the nurses who used to defend her have gone quiet." I pictured Jody alone at a long table, fork motionless over a salad she couldn't taste. The same woman who once relished authority, now shrinking beneath the scrutiny she had tried to weaponize against me. At home, the tension was unbearable. Carl avoided both of us, spending longer hours at work. When he did come home, he spoke little, his shoulders hunched as though he carried a weight too heavy to shift. Jody, on the other hand, seemed to unravel thread by thread. She clung to her phone like a lifeline, her voice sharp and desperate. One evening, I passed by the bedroom door and caught her whispering, "They think I falsified reports. They said a complaint came from outside the family too. No, I don't know who. Everyone's watching. Her voice broke on the last word. Everyone's watching. The irony was sharp. She had wanted everyone to watch me stumble, to believe I was fading, confused, incompetent. But now, every eye was fixed on her. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly, but I documented still. Every shift in her tone, every box of my belongings, she quietly slid back into place as if to erase her earlier cruelty. The ledger grew into something undeniable. Then, on Friday morning, the call came. I didn't need to hear both sides of the conversation. The way Jody's knees buckled against the counter told me enough. Suspension had become something harder, something irreversible. She hung up slowly, staring at nothing. "They've recommended termination," she whispered. Her voice was small, strangled. "My license may be under review." Carl walked in just as the words left her mouth. He froze, eyes darting between us. "Termination," he repeated, his voice stunned. Jody turned on him, fury and despair twisting her face. "Your mother did this. She poisoned them against me." I stood, calm, unshaken. "No, Jody. You did this yourself. I just stopped hiding it." The silence that followed was a chasm Carl couldn't cross. He sat down heavily, pressing his hands to his face. Jody stormed down the hall, slamming the bedroom door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, but it didn't shake me. For the first time, the walls themselves seemed to exhale. The home was remembering who it belonged to. On Monday morning, the house was still when Jody left for the clinic. She didn't slam the door this time. She just closed it quietly, as though she were walking into her own funeral. Carl had already gone to work, leaving me alone with the echo of her heels fading down the drive. I brewed coffee and waited. Not with fear, but with patience. I knew what was coming. By noon, the phone rang. I didn't move to answer. It wasn't for me. Through the thin walls, I could hear Jody's voice when she returned, breaking like glass. "They fired me," she whispered into the receiver. Then louder, "No, not suspended. Terminated. Effective immediately. They said the board reviewed complaints from staff, from patients' families, even from outside. There's nothing I can do." Her sobs followed, muffled but real. I sat in the living room, the morning light falling across my lap, and felt a quiet strength settle into me. This wasn't gloating, it was justice. That evening, Carl came home to find her curled on the couch, mascara streaked, her phone abandoned. He looked at me, his eyes hollow. "Mom," he said softly, "what did you do?" "I told the truth," I answered. "And the truth doesn't vanish just because she wanted it to." He didn't argue. For once, he didn't defend her. He only sat beside her, staring at the wall, as if the last layer of illusion had finally crumbled. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Jody no longer barked orders or staged performances. She moved like a ghost through the house. Neighbors avoided her. At the market, I caught two women glancing my way, then whispering, not about me this time, but about her. Kay told me that at the clinic, everyone knew the story now. How the doctor who tried to erase her own mother-in-law ended up erased herself. How she played at control and lost everything instead. One afternoon, Nora brought me a clipping from the local paper. The clinic had issued a statement. Dr. Jody Hemsworth has been removed from her position following internal review. The health and safety of our patients and staff remain our top priority. The words were cold, professional, final. I folded the article and slipped it into my ledger, between the pages marked with her lies and my truth. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a single candle burning. The house was mine again. Not because of locks or deeds, but because I had fought for my place inside it and won. When I turned off the light and headed to bed, I passed the hallway mirror. My reflection met my eyes steadily. No tremor, no doubt. They had tried to exile me from my own life. But I had opened the door, stepped back inside, and claimed every inch. And now, everyone knew it. Weeks passed, The air in the house grew lighter, as if the walls themselves had shed a burden. Jody moved out quietly one morning, taking her clothes, her perfumes, her brittle laughter. No announcement, no farewell, just absence. Carl stayed, though he looked smaller somehow, shrunken by shame. He spoke little, avoided my eyes. I didn't press him. Some truths had to ripen on their own. I turned my attention to the life that was left. My life. I planted marigolds in the garden, their stubborn gold faces a reminder of survival. I baked pies again, not to impress or to bribe my way into family gatherings, but because I wanted the kitchen to smell like sugar and cinnamon. Kay and Nora came over often. We played cards at the dining table, laughed until our sides ached. The ledger of lies lay tucked away in my drawer, no longer needed but never forgotten. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the clinic. Not for Jody, but for me. It was a note from the director, written in neat blue ink. Thank you for coming forward. Because of your courage, others felt safe to speak. You have protected more than yourself. You have protected patients too. I read it twice, then folded it into the same envelope that held the deed. My armor. My legacy. Carl finally spoke one evening. He stood in the doorway, shoulders heavy. Mom, he said, I didn't see it. Or maybe I didn't want to. I'm sorry I studied him. The boy I once carried through fevers. The man who had turned away when I needed him most. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but I nodded. You saw her. That's enough for now. He wept quietly, and I let him. Not as punishment, not as mercy, just as fact. When he left for the night, I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The house hummed with quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to no one but you. I thought of Frank, of the letter he left before his surgery. Stay open. Live with your hands unclenched. I opened my palms against the steam of the cup and realized I had done exactly that. They had tried to erase me, first with locks, then with whispers, then with lies. But I had chosen paper, proof, and persistence, and in the end, it was enough. The marigolds glowed faintly in the dusk. The house smelled of pie. My name was still mine. My voice still carried. I wasn't waiting at a door anymore. I was inside, and I wasn't leaving.